And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Building codes are a set of rules that set the minimum standard to which a new home or building can be constructed. Prior to September 1st, 1973, local governments adopted a building code under local bylaws. In 1973, an amendment to the Municipal Act gave the provincial government power to make regulations establishing a building code for the province. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1989.
This building is a recognizable sight to almost everyone who has traveled the highway between Terrace and Kitimat. It sits just off the highway, a few kilometers outside of Terrace. It's a large, attractive structure constructed with whole logs, the sort of place that would make a very nice house. But for pretty much a decade now, it's sat there empty, a big log shell that is a home only to the dreams and aspirations of its owner. That man is Wayne Ridgway. He bought the 2 acres the structure sits on in 1973. In 1976, he laid the foundations, and by 78, all the logs had been stacked in place. Ridgway built it not as his home, but as his future business. His plan was, and still is, to establish a restaurant. He thought the proposal was a natural to succeed. The site sits on a busy highway with plenty of drive-by traffic. People are spending more and more of their food money in restaurants, and he thought the rustic log building would attract customers just for its romantic ambience. But 10 years and tens of thousands of dollars after Ridgway started building his dream project, it sits there empty. Things have not gone well for the aspiring restaurateur. There have been a number of setbacks. The first stumbling block Ridgway dealt with concerned zoning regulations. When he started the building, there were no zoning restrictions on the land. In 1976, however, the regional district passed a bylaw that made the area low-density residential, which meant the property couldn't be used for restaurant purposes. However, because Ridgway had started construction prior to the enactment of the bylaw, he successfully argued for legal non-conforming status.
Well, we were quite relieved because you can't do too much of the building this size here in a residence unless, you want to have a big family or something like that,
That first hurdle was overcome in the spring of 1986, and Ridgway hoped to have his restaurant in operation within a year.
It'd be more or less the country western theme. We've got quite a bit of antique stuff that goes in. I've got some big wagon wheel lights and, some old tills and a lot of things that we think that we could a little bit more to offer than what's normal, what you would find a run-of-the-mill restaurant type thing and banquet room. And so it'd be country western, kind of like down in Texas. I don't know if you've ever been to Texas or not.
But as is often the case, development of the restaurant project went slower than expected. Ridgway needed financial help as well as some business advice. He went to the Federal Business Development Bank and through it had a case report done on the feasibility of his restaurant proposal. Ridgway was encouraged by the report.
Yes, that was a case council worker from out of Vancouver. He's the director of the food services of British Columbia and the Yukon. He's the #1 man, and he came by here and had given us a forecast of what the business would do based on the highway count and the location and the building and the contents of the amount of equipment that I've got. And he said it was very promising. He said it was very promising and that from the way it looks and the way we've managed to put it up as cheaply as we have, without too much overhead labor, etc., and paying for new prices for the equipment, that it's got a real good possibility of making it here.
Armed with the case report, Ridgway went to his banker for a loan to finish the restaurant. It was about 50% complete, but Ridgway still needed some $200,000 to bring it to the operational stage.
And the banker was interested in it, eh?
Yeah, he said that they were going to go for it, but they needed to have an appraisal done on it to see just a professional opinion as to what was in the property, what amount of equity was in it.
And so Ridgway had an appraisal done of the property and building. It was his second appraisal. One done 3.5 years earlier estimated the market value at about $70,000. But that was in 1985, before the zoning restriction was lifted from residential only to allow commercial development on the property. As well, Ridgway had made further improvements to the building and bought about $100,000 worth of kitchen equipment for the restaurant. He was certain the second appraisal would be at least double the first, but when he saw the bottom line, he was stunned. His development had apparently gone down in value. The second appraisal estimated its worth at $45,000 to $60,000. Ridgway thought the appraiser had made a mistake.
No, I don't think that he adhered to the what he was supposed to arrive at a reasonable price for this place here. I mean, you know, $45,000 for a complete complex like this here, you can't buy practically the property for that price, let alone the equipment in the 7,000 square foot building. But it's just an opinion. So when you get an appraisal, it's just an opinion of what a man says it's worth. Maybe to him, maybe it's not worth anything.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. When determining the value of a property or building, there are several methodologies that our qualified appraisers have to choose from, which are driven by a scope of assignment and property type. Let us return to the archives as Wayne Ridgway shares his reaction when he received the appraisal report.
Because I need, you know, but to me, it's with the capital investment and my labor, it's worth considerably more, and my banker agrees with me as well. So he was on the premises, and he was wanting to go. He wanted a piece of the action because I needed the money from him to help to finish it. You see, and I had given him the report and
the appraisal report.
The appraisal, and he just threw it. He said, "There's been obviously typographical error," is the words that he used.
When he read the bottom line.
When he read the bottom line, he couldn't believe it. And he said, obviously, there's a typographical error here, and maybe you should go talk to the man that made the report. Whereupon doing so, he told me that there was no comment, and he adamantly dismissed me from the premises.
Of course, there had not been a typographical error, and a month after Ridgway received the appraisal, he received a letter from his banker advising there would not be any additional funds to complete the restaurant facility because there was insufficient equity to back the loan.
You wouldn't loan any money on a project that's going to cost you $200,000 to complete based on $45,000 equity into it. That's the building, and that's the equipment, and that's the building site, the land that it's sitting on. And I put all the improvements. I put hydro, water on it, and built the road in here. And you wouldn't loan too much money based on that, would you?
With the rejection by the bank of his loan application, Ridgway lost any chance of completing the restaurant in the foreseeable future. And with that, he also lost out on an agreement he had with a restaurateur to lease his facilities for some $8,000 a month.
Yeah, we lost them, yeah. They just couldn't wait any longer. They wanted it real bad. Because they know, as being in the restaurant business before, that they know what the potential would be. They know that they could really do well here.
With his business plans crumbling because of what he thought was a poor assessment by the appraiser, Ridgway started fighting back. He lodged a complaint with the RCMP's Commercial Crime Division in Prince Rupert. Ridgway says 2 officers investigated and came to the conclusion there was no evidence of any criminal wrongdoing. Ridgway also complained to the Appraisal Institute of Canada, the body that oversees the practices of appraisers in the country, which then launched an investigation. And Ridgway also wrote the Ministry of the Attorney General, which suggested he consult with a lawyer.
And delve into it a little deeper than what they can, because that's sort of out of their line of expertise. So this is the next.
Because it may be a civil matter rather than a criminal matter.
Well, this is it, and it's this is the next. This will be the next stage that we'll have to go to in order to correct this here, if not on principle alone, because you just can't take a beating like that. I can't. So
Lane Appraisals in Terrace is the company that did the second evaluation of the market value of Ridgway's property and log building. Company principal David Lane wouldn't comment on the Ridgway appraisal, saying it isn't appropriate to discuss an individual's file in public. But he did say properties in the Terrace area have generally gone up in value, not down, in the past 4 years.
I don't know as far as commenting on a specific property. I wouldn't be prepared to do that.
So it's possible, though, that 3 years of property could go down by $15,000 even if improvements are made on it.
I mean, hypothetically, certainly.
So why do you think he would launch an official complaint with the Appraisal Institute of Canada?
I don't know.
So what did the Appraisal Institute of Canada come back to you with?
They haven't come back to me with anything.
They haven't contacted you at all about a complaint from the Ridgway out there on the highway?
They have advised that a complaint was made, but beyond that, I haven't heard anything.
And you responded to that?
Yes, I have.
And they haven't got back to you?
No, they haven't.
Lane says the value of a property is not necessarily equal to the amount of money invested in it. Ridgway isn't arguing with that, but he still doesn't agree his property has gone down in value over the past 4 years.
Everything else seems to be booming now. There's a lot of projects going on, Kitimat, out the lake, all in town, up in Stewart. And this seems to be a center right here around this terrace area, and I can't see why my place would be depreciated so severely when everybody else's values is going up. Like to say, it's a real mystery.
And so as Ridgway continues to seek out legal advice, he also continues to work on the log building he hopes one day will house a restaurant. He's now putting in a few windows and doing other finishing work on the interior. But meanwhile, the equipment he bought sits in the quiet stillness of the kitchen, unused. And the chairs and the tables he hopes one day will be filled with hungry diners are collecting dust. But Ridgway's dream of a restaurant still burns brightly. He says, despite the setbacks, he's not giving up.
So how do you keep your spirits up when you hit a brick wall like that?
Well, when you know what you're doing is right and you believe in what you're doing, there can't anybody tamper with that. Not from where I come from, anyway. No. Never happened.
So it's like principle.
Yeah, well, principle right now is probably about 90% of it, and the rest of it I know what we can do, but you can't let them beat you. You just can't do it. I won't.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. In 1887, Robert Tomlinson decided not to relocate to Metlakatla when William Duncan established this new utopian Christian community. Instead, he founded the village of Cedarvale on the west side of the Skeena River. Let us return to the archives with this story about Edith Essex.
At the end of a long stretch of gravel road, winding through the lush green countryside southwest of Chitwanga, is an historical surprise. Nestled in the trees on the west bank of the Skeena River sits the Cedarvale General Store and Post Office, looking much as it did 100 years ago when it was built. And the woman who runs the quaint old establishment has been in these parts all of her life. On June 2nd, Edith Essex celebrated her 83rd birthday, an event in itself. To make the day even more special, Edith was honored by Canada Post for the many years she's been providing postal service to the area. 68 years ago, Edith began her postal career at the Cedarvale office and has no immediate plans to give up the job she took on in 1921. She was 15 when she began working for her father, John Thompson, who got involved in the business in order to help out his friend, William Moxley.
And Mr. Moxley's son ran the store, you see, and he ran it into debt. Wine, women, and song. That's what he spent the money on. So, and then he beat it, you know, and the wholesalers in Prince Rupert were going to sell Mr. Moxley's home to pay this debt. I don't think they don't do that anymore these days. I don't think they can't sell your home, but in those days they're going to. And so my father, he was well, he had his own job and everything, but they were good friends, and so he said that he would help him out, you see. So we did. It took years and years to pay it off, the debt, you know.
How much was the debt?
Oh, it was over $4,000, and you know, that was a lot of money in those days.
When Edith's father retired in 1942, she took over as postmaster until she retired at the age of 65. But Edith wasn't ready to give up her job, so she continued to work for subsequent postmasters. And work, she says, is the secret to staying young.
Don't have time to get old. Don't have time.
What did you think when Canada Post asked you to retire at 65, because that's the age that you have to retire? Did you think that you would stop working? Or?
I felt kind of sad. I really felt sad about it, you know.
But many years have passed since then, and Edith is as active as ever, breaking all employment records at Canada Post.
I don't think we have uncovered anyone who's worked for Canada Post as long as Edith has. She, everyone seems to be surprised when they hear that she's actually been working for 68 years. We have a new club that we call the Heritage Club that we've put into place to acknowledge people who have put in long-term service, and generally those people, it's 25, 30 years. 68 years is pretty unusual.
In recognition of this unusual woman, Canada Post officials joined Edith's friends and family for a day of celebration. But before the ceremonies could get underway, there was the mail to take care of first. At 1:37 p.m., the Via Rail train appeared around the bend and made its scheduled stop at the Cedarvale post office. Edith has always picked up the mail herself, but if there are heavy packages, the train crew are quick to lend a hand. After a brief photo session with the star of the day, the crew hop back on the departing train. But they'll be back in a couple of days, since mail deliveries are on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of each week. With the mailbag tucked safely away in the small post office, the honors begin. Canada Post officials made a series of presentations to Edith, including a gold watch and a set of 1910 postal scales from the Cedarvale office.
I think it's really important when someone like Edith dedicates her entire working life, really, to providing postal service, that we acknowledge that kind of commitment and dedication and say thank you, really.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Edith Mary Essex was born in Liverpool, England in June 28, 1906. The family relocated to Cedarvale, BC in 1913. At the age of 14, Edith started working as an assistant postmaster at her father's post office and general store. She became postmistress in 1942. In this final segment of Open Connection, we discover how she got to work.
After the ceremony, Edith shared her 83rd birthday cake with friends of all ages, who also expressed their appreciation for her years of dedicated service. As we found out, Edith isn't one to blow her own horn. However, her friends are quick to recall the times she has proven her dedication. According to one friend, Edith walks to the post office from home more than 2 miles away, no matter how much snow or ice the winter brings. She has also been known to write extra letters just so there would be mail in the bag. And speaking of friends, Edith's black lab, Kelly, is always nearby. During our interview with his mistress, Kelly unabashedly bounded onto our outdoor set, stopping the interview until I managed to untangle him from the coils of microphone cord wrapped round and round his paws. When Edith isn't busy sorting and dispatching mail or looking after the general store, she might be found working on her stamp collection or writing poetry. As a child, Edith would clip poems from the local newspaper. In more recent years, she has published books of poetry evoking the simplicity of her life and work in rural northwestern BC.
At the tiny post office of Cedarvale, the place where people call for mail, it was inspection day, and you may guess the post office was in an awful mess. Parcels scattered on the floor, mail bags stacked up by the door, magazines and papers belonging to self piled up haphazard on the shelf.
Initially, Edith didn't envision herself actually writing poetry. She simply liked to collect it. But that changed unexpectedly one day.
I think it was because I had a black lab like him, and somebody shot him. And he disappeared anyway. We know who did it, but you could never prove these things. And I don't know, I was walking along the road coming to work, and the tears were running down my face. I was thinking about the dog, you know. And then all at once this poem came into mind, you know. So when I got down here, I wrote it down.
Things haven't changed much over the years at the store and post office. Remnants of the past are everywhere. The old advertisements and signs pinned on the walls have yellowed with age. The wood stove and lanterns provide heat and light, just as they did at the turn of the century. There's still no electricity in the dark and cozy rooms, but Edith doesn't seem to mind. One aspect of life, however, that has changed is the size of the community. There used to be a lot more people living in Cedarvale, working in the forests or on the railroad.
We used to sell those logging boots and pants and shirts and leather gloves and socks and washboards, brooms, axe handles, you know, everything was needed around, files.
After almost 7 decades living in the same community, doing the same job, I asked Edith if she ever had a hankering to leave.
Probably if I had an education, I probably wouldn't be here, but, you know, can't get anywhere without an education.
Edith may have only gone to school for 4 years of her long life, but that doesn't mean she hasn't received an education along the way. And there has also been the odd moment of excitement in this otherwise quiet community. Edith recalls the war years when a Japanese incendiary balloon landed on the Seven Sisters Mountains, which stand guard on the other side of the Skeena.
This old Indian lady, she phoned over and told me, and I got in touch with the authorities, and then they came out and they went up there and brought things down. They gave me a piece of rope for a souvenir.
A piece of rope from the
from the balloon, you know. And this Indian lady, she said God was taking care of us. That's why it didn't explode, you know, and set the woods, the country on fire. Yeah, that's what she said, yeah, that God was taking care of us.
Edith says she does feel taken care of in her life. Her 83 years may have been relatively quiet and simple, but that doesn't mean they've been boring.
I don't have time to get bored. I don't. I never get half the things done that I want to do, you know. When you live alone and do everything for yourself, you don't have time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but that connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.